thriving, you know, city that we live in. So this is, I love speaking to people in the real estate industry because you guys are on the front line, right? And everybody has questions about water. Do we have enough water? What's happening? I'm reading all these articles in the paper. What do they mean? And so one, I'm here to tell you that, yes, we have enough water for all the people who live here. We have had very good leaders in the field of water, and they've planned long term. So we're in good shape right now. But the big challenge is we're growing rapidly, and we continue, and all the projections show that that will continue. And we need to figure out how to have enough water to sustain that kind of growth. And also, we're in the longest drought in since we've been keeping records. We've been in a 20-year drought, and there's all kinds of studies out there looking at water supply. And one recently came out, was in the news, saying that it's the worst drought in 1,200 years. We're looking at possibly impacts of climate change. This may be the new normal. So we're having to adapt. And if you're planning about water, you have to be conservative and look at some of the worst case scenarios. But rest assured that we are preparing for it, and we have enough water for everybody right now. Okay, so the Colorado River Basin, it's 7 states and Mexico. As you can see from the map, it's basically split into 2 sections. So the upper basin and the lower basin, and that's divided at Lake Powell. So Glen Canyon Dam, there's a place just below Glen Canyon Dam called Lee's Ferry. And anybody who likes fly fishing might have been up there, because there's good fishing right below the dam. And the upper basin is Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. And then the lower basin is Arizona, California, and Nevada. And then Mexico, because it's another country, it's sort of managed differently. We have to do different types of agreements, but they're part of the lower basin. And in 1922, when the Colorado Compact was agreed to, the hydrology was much wetter. So they split it up, thinking that 15 million acre feet was a conservative estimate of the average flows of the Colorado River. So they gave 7.5 to the upper basin and 7.5 to the lower basin. Well, it's now looking like, I've seen estimates of the average flow is between 10 and 13.5 million acre feet, depending on what study you're looking at. So 15 is too high. The river just doesn't produce that much. And then on top of that, you add to the reservoirs and evaporation losses, and you add Mexico. So the treaty with Mexico, there was a treaty in 1944 that agreed that the United States has to deliver 1.5 million acre feet to Mexico. So if you add up 15 and 1.5, that's 16.5 million acre feet. And just as far as the allocations, Arizona gets 2.8 million acre feet, California 4.4, Nevada, poor Nevada, 0.3. And then the upper basin, we don't have them on here, but they divide it up based on percentages. So they don't have numeric allocations, but they each get a percentage. Colorado gets the biggest, then Utah, I think then Wyoming, and then New Mexico. So this is the major reservoirs you can see here. Lake Powell is the major storage reservoir for the upper basin. And Lake Powell, many of you may have visited and gone out on boats there. It's really beautiful. That is the storage reservoir for the upper basin. So it's at the bottom of their system. And then Lake Mead is the major storage reservoir for the lower basin. It's at the top of our system. They're managed in a coordinated way. So there's agreements for how to operate the dams and how much to release at different levels. And I won't get into all of that, but as I mentioned, you know, the math problem on the previous slide, we lose about 600,000 acre feet to evaporation from each reservoir. So that's 1.2 if you add it up. And so then you have to, you know, add that to the 16.5, and you can see that it's just a math problem. We don't have enough to provide the 15 million acre feet that the states are entitled to, and the 1.5 that Mexico's entitled to. So this is the Bureau of Reclamation, Central Arizona Project. All of the people who manage our water supply are keeping track on a daily basis of our water supply, the hydrology, how much water is in the reservoirs. And this bucket chart, it shows you all the upper basin reservoirs, and the percentages are the percent of capacity of that reservoir. You can see that Lake Powell is at 25% of capacity. This is from February 21st, 2022. And we get these at our board meetings. We have board meetings once a month, and we get these updates every month. So we're tracking like the snowpack and the precipitation in the upper basin. 25% is the lowest that it's ever been since it was originally filled. And then Lake Mead is at 35%. So both of those are at very critically low levels. And that's why you're seeing all the news about the water on the Colorado River system. So what the work that we do is trying to address these challenges and come up with solutions. So in 2007, the water managers got together. Actually, in the early 2000s, they were looking at the hydrology and said, you know, we need to have an agreement for what happens when there are shortages. So in 2007, we call them the 2007 guidelines, but they're basically guidelines that explain what's going to happen if there's a shortage, who's going to take what cuts, how's that all going to work. So the 2007 guidelines provided, you know, how much each state would have to cut back, what kind of reductions, and then each state and Mexico could plan for that and figure out internally, you know, where are those cuts going to come from. Well, the hydrology didn't get any better. It kept getting worse. And so we got together and said, we need to increase those reductions. The 2000 guidelines aren't enough. And we're looking at projections with Lake Mead, Lake Powell could get to critical elevations if we don't store more water in the system. So we in Arizona got together, and it took us a couple of years. We got all the stakeholders together at a table, and we had meetings, and we agreed in Arizona how we were going to increase the reductions. And then we also got together with the other lower basin states and figured out, how are we going to do this? So shortages are determined based on elevations at Lake Mead. A tier 1 shortage is at elevation 1075. At elevation 1075, Arizona's supply is reduced by 512,000 acre feet. You can also see California and Nevada. Their reductions are less than ours because in 1968, when we were trying to get the authorization for C.A.P. through Congress, California, who has, a lot of political power, a lot of representatives, they were opposing it. And they said, we're only going to support it if C.A.P. agrees to have the lowest priority. So here we are. We are taking 512,000 acre feet at a tier 1 shortage. Last year, 2021, Bureau of Reclamation is the one who, and then the Secretary of the Interior determines when we're in what shortage we're in and when we're in a shortage. So last August, a tier 1 shortage was declared for the first time. That means that we were below elevation 1075. And so starting this year in January of 2022, we're having to take those reductions. You can see in the graphic on the left, it's kind of a bucket chart that shows you the different tiers. And it's basically tier 1 is 1075, tier 2 is 1050, tier 3 is 1025. 1090 was added because Arizona was being proactive, and 3 years before we entered into DCP, we started storing water in the lake, about 192,000 acre feet a year. So we added a tier 0 because we were already taking reductions before, the signatures were on the page. And then we added 1045. That has to do with California. California, under the DCP, agreed to take additional reductions at that level. You can see the diagram in the middle. There is the C.A.P. supply. So of the 2.8 million acre feet that go to Arizona, you guys can probably hear me. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So in the middle there, it shows C.A.P's supply is about 1.6 million acre feet out of the 2.8. So the rest of the 2.8 goes to on-river users. That's agriculture in Yuma. There's several Indian tribes, but C.A.P. takes the bulk of it, 1.6. The 512,000 acre foot reduction puts us to that red line. So you can see graphically that it's a really big chunk of our water. The yellow in the middle there is mitigation. In order to get everybody to agree to take these reductions, we also agreed to mitigate some of the water users who are going to be really impacted. So we're, from some stored water and various things, we're helping mitigate some of the impacts of DCP. So who is impacted in 2022 by this tier 1 shortage? Other excess water, we call it, that was reduced by 100%. That is underground storage. So the Arizona Water Banking Authority has been storing water underground for decades and has stored trillions of gallons of water for municipalities. So in the event that we have a shortage and they're impacted, they can recover that water. It's been stored underground. Also, a lot of people don't know what this is, but being in the real estate industry, you might have heard of the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. That is also impacted by this because they can't replenish supplies based on excess C.A.P. water. The CAGRD was created to allow developers to build new developments using groundwater as long as they replenish it back into the aquifer. The next group that's impacted is ag. That's Central Arizona ag, mostly in Pinal County, some in Pima and Maricopa. Under a tier 1 shortage, their C.A.P. supplies would have been cut 100%. That's a huge impact to take in 1 year. So that's why we came up with this mitigation plan. It would have mitigated them for 3 years. The first 2 years, the hydrology was good enough, so we didn't go into a tier 1 shortage. This is the 3rd year. So they're getting mitigation to so that they're being reduced still by 65%. I mean, let that sink in. That's a lot of their supply. They do have some wells that they can rely on for additional supplies, but it's going to hit agriculture in Pinal County pretty hard. Tier 1 shortage, there's no reduction for municipal and industrial users, and there's no reduction for tribes. That we're really trying hard to protect the tier 3 level 1025 because that would impact the long-term supplies of the cities and the tribes. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think I maybe I'm holding my hand too close to that button or something. Okay. So the 500 plus plan, well, we had DCP inked and there's we can just keep trading them back. All right, can you hear me? So so we had DCP inked, you know, that's the overlay to the 2007 guidelines, additional you know, additional conservation and storage in the Lake Mead. In the DCP, there was a provision that said if in any 2-year period, it looks like Lake Mead will get down to elevation 1030, all of the parties have to reconvene and talk about what we can do. That happened basically the same time that the tier 1 shortage was declared. They looked at the projections and said, it's possible that we could hit elevation 1030, you know, in the next 5 years. So everybody got together again. You know, we had just been working on the DCP, so it actually was a lot faster this time. We had the groups organized, the process was set up. So it was implemented pretty quickly, but Arizona, California, Nevada all agreed we have to store more. We have to leave more in Lake Mead to prevent a lower level shortage. And so everybody has agreed to contribute 500,000 acre feet per year for the next 5 years, basically. Arizona has agreed for to 223,000 acre feet for this year and next year. They're annual agreements, but we've committed for 2 years. And that includes both tribes and non-tribal participants. How we're doing this is ADWR, the Department of Water Resources, and the C.A.P. are contributing financially to essentially pay people not to use water. So the tribes, some of the Gila River Indian community, the Colorado River Indian tribes have big allocations of Colorado River water, and they've agreed to cut back. They're being compensated. And also 30,000 acre feet from on-river users in Yuma, they're going to fallow agricultural land, and they're getting paid, compensated for that in their annual agreements. But that's the first time that the on-river users, who have the more senior rights to the Colorado River, are participating. And so that's a big step. And then 193,000 acre feet is coming from C.A.P. water users. That includes Gila River Indian community, because they receive water from the C.A.P. So all the contributions will go directly to Lake Mead. We call it system conservation or intentionally created surplus. There are different mechanisms to store water. And as I mentioned, we're providing funding. These short-term solutions are all voluntary, temporary, and compensated. What's next? So we are working on building a resilient Colorado River system. In the short term, we are working on these programs to keep more water in Lake Mead. This is the fastest way that we can get water back into the lake, is by essentially paying users not to use their water. And so that's what we have been doing. And California and Nevada and Mexico are all participating. So that's an important piece of it. Even though Arizona has to take the biggest hit, we have full cooperation and participation with the other states in the basin and Mexico. So we're not in this alone. Senior users don't have to take reductions, but they're doing it voluntarily because they understand the math problem that I talked about earlier, and that shouldn't fall completely on the shoulders of Arizona. So in addition, the purple line there, we are doing reconsultation. The 2007 guidelines that I mentioned, those expire in 2026. And so we have to determine what comes after the 2007 guidelines. We are working with the other parties to develop new guidelines and longer term solutions, which are likely going to involve everybody having to share in the reductions and recognizing the new hydrology that we're facing on the river. Those are complicated negotiations, but we expect that, by 2026, when the 2007 guidelines expire, that we'll have a new set of guidelines for how to operate the dams and the river that include everybody in the basin. In addition, what are other long-term efforts that we're doing? Augmentation, conservation, reuse, and recovery. So many of you heard the governor announced $1 billion for water. What does that mean? We're all working out the details of what that's going to be, but it's an effort to say Arizona is open for business, and we are going to be proactive in finding solutions. Augmentation. One of the projects we're looking at for a long-term solution is ocean desal in the Sea of Cortez. And how that would work is we would pay for it. We'd build 2 desal plants and the water from the desal plants would be provided to Mexico, and then through an exchange, we would take some of their Colorado River allocation. So we'd have to deliver less water to Mexico, and we could keep that water in Lake Mead. There's a lot of controversy about desal. So there's some other options that people are looking at. Pipeline from the Missouri River to Denver, pipeline from the Mississippi River to the lower basin. Those are pretty complicated as well. I've visited Israel and saw all their desal plants. I mean, they, like, the majority of their water supply is desalinated, and it was very impressive. So I think that's something that we could definitely look at. California's already built a couple ocean desal plants, but the water is really expensive. So, you know, it's going to have to be mixed with less expensive supplies. So we'll see if that happens. And there's also environmental impacts from the brine that's produced from desal. So wheeling, we have all this, if we're taking shortages, we're going to have all this capacity in the canal to move water. And we fully expect that we'll be doing that. So different entities, you know, that need water, cities or developers, if they can purchase supplies, they can wheel it through our canal. Conservation is just as important, if not more, than augmentation. C.A.P. doesn't have as much control over conservation. Conservation in Arizona is done from the state Department of Water Resources, and then the cities implement different conservation measures. So if your city doesn't have that many conservation measures, it may be that their particular water portfolio is really good. So even though we're having these shortages on the Colorado, they may have plenty of water. Some of the cities are very, you know, they feel like they have enough, so they don't need to, you know, implement water rationing or that kind of thing. The state agency, if you're in an active management area, there are conservation measures for anybody that pumps groundwater, unless they have an exempt well. So for Colorado River, we're doing these fallowing partnerships with agriculture. Fallowing land just means you pay them not to farm a particular tract of land. And it has to be land that they can show has been irrigated, you know, 3 out of a 5-year period, I think is what we look at to do the fallowing. And then other innovative ways to conserve, we're looking at something called NDRIP. That's a technology, drip irrigation technology that if it's adopted, it could help save water so that agriculture, which uses about 75% of the water supply in Arizona and a lot of Western states, so it takes a lot of water to grow crops. NDRIP is a new technology that's being looked at to see if we can reduce the amount of water that they need to grow the same, you know, have the same crop yields. And Brock Reservoir, I won't talk about that. It's just a storage reservoir on the Colorado system that improves efficiencies. Reuse is really important. Our cities here in Arizona are very proactive on this, figuring out ways to recycle and reuse water. You can see it a lot of on golf courses, and at some point it may be used for potable drinking water. At this point, we're not doing that, but there's lots of other uses for effluent. The Palo Verde generating station uses all effluent reclaimed water. So that's really important. We are partnering with Metropolitan Water District in LA and Southern Nevada Water Authority to do a big water reuse project in Los Angeles. They have a lot of water that from Los Angeles that goes out into the ocean. They're going to build a big plant to keep that water, treat it, reuse it, and we'll again do a kind of exchange. So we're helping to pay for it, and then California will leave more water in the Colorado in Lake Mead through an exchange. Recovery, that is just how all the water that we've stored underground, how does it get recovered when people need it? We're looking at efficient ways to recover the water that we've stored. So that's basically the end of my presentation. I hope that you understand we have a lot of water stored underground. Some of the cities have really good water portfolios. So even though we're looking at kind of a crisis in terms of how much water is in the Colorado River system and Lake Mead, and we need to plan now for our future. We're in good shape now. You're not going to have to do water rationing. But if we want to continue to grow the way that we have been, we are going to need to conserve, reuse, and augment our supplies. So for more information, we have a news site. C.A.P. has a news site, knowyourwaternews.com. Lots of great fact sheets. There's these, I love the fact sheets because they're like 2 pages, great graphics, color. And, you know, if you have clients that have concerns, it's something you could just hand to people and say, oh, look, this is, you know, what's happening with the shortage. Or so you could go to that site and click on the, I think it's like the downloadable fact sheets. And there's lots of videos and stuff there too. Our main website, centralarizonaproject.com. Other resources, the Department of Water Resources. I think that's supposed to be news.azwater.gov, but I'm not sure. I didn't make this slide, so you can try it with or without an S. And the Bureau of Reclamation has a lot of information and data if you like that kind of thing. Hydrology, usbr.gov. That's it. I hope I didn't go on too long because I love talking about water, and my kids always make fun of me. They have this sign, like when we're at a group event, they like, don't talk about water anymore, Mom. You're boring people. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. You want to start? They could. So here's the thing with golf courses, and I've been very involved with representing some and kind of what's happening with them right now. The groundwater code was enacted in 1980, and it had conservation requirements applied to municipal and industrial users, which includes golf courses, also ag. But so it's had this program where golf courses have if they use any groundwater, they have a water allotment. So they got these rights that they could use to pump groundwater or, you know, combine it with other supplies. Those have gone progressively, you know, down, the water allotments with each management period. We're in the 5th management plan time right now. So there's a draft out that's going to have really severe cuts to some of the older golf courses that use groundwater. That's, you know, being worked out right now, but the golf courses that rely on reclaimed water are going to have a huge advantage because they are not subject to those groundwater restrictions. If they use other renewable supplies, that's going to be better. It's not as good as the effluent because they get a special credit for effluent. So what I think is going to happen going forward, the golf courses are going to be smaller. So there's a limit of 90 acres. Seems like a lot, but you know, the older golf courses were, you know, 200 acres. So they're going to be limited in size. So most of the landscaping around the golf courses is going to be desert landscaping. And then just, you know, the fairways and the greens will be the turf. And they're going to probably have to rely on reclaimed water if it's available, or non-groundwater sources. So that's what I think is probably going to happen in Arizona for new golf courses. I did see in Nevada a proposal to restrict no new golf courses in Las Vegas area. They have different water challenges than we have, but you know, I don't know, is that coming to Arizona at some point? I haven't heard anybody talking about that, but there may be restrictions on new golf courses, and the existing ones are, you know, they're cracking down on their water use and their allotments are going down. So another question?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
So we are in Glendale. I also live here in Glendale. And per Google, we get our water from Southern California. So they're not part of the C.A.P, correct? Or are they? And are they doing as much to conserve water and make sure we don't run out, since we're...
Okay, so I think you get your water from SRP.
Well, it says Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. It's from where Glendale gets it. That's Glendale, California. You know what? Never mind. That's Google. So we...
Yeah, no, because
I think Google's not very accurate. Thank you for being
there
here.
is a Glendale, California. Yeah, so Glendale, Arizona, though, that there is actually a good question, because there are some of the original cities here that are fed by the SRP system, Salt River Project,
right,
are a little unique, because Salt River Project was originally an agricultural district, right? It was all agricultural land. And so over time that converted to municipalities, but some people still have these old agricultural water rights for their land, even though they're not farms anymore, they're homes. And so I know there's some people in Glendale who have that, and those are treated differently. That's why everyone is like, why is there flood irrigation in Phoenix? And that's why, because some of these older properties that used to be ag land, if they have water rights, surface water rights from the Salt and Verde River system through SRP, if they have water rights associated with that land, that carries forward. And so they can basically do what they want with that water. And so that's managed a little bit differently than the rest of the supplies. Any other questions? Sure.
I have a question. Hello, can I ask a question?
We'll go to the Zoom questions in a minute. I think we have a couple more here in the audience. And we're just trying to get a microphone so you all can hear them.
Okay, here we go. The relationship between Lake Powell and Lake Mead, if things get worse, will they drain Lake Powell to keep Lake Mead up, or how does that work on the percentages?
It's an interesting question. In the past, when people talked about doing that, everyone thought that was crazy. You know, there's some groups that say get rid of the dam. There's others that say drain Lake Powell and just use Lake Mead. I don't know. I know that in the past, nobody's wanted to do that, because these reservoirs also provide power generations. We didn't talk at all about that, but there's a lot of power, hydropower, that comes out of Lake Powell and Lake Mead And those entities, have rights to certain amounts of power, and they're impacted if the water levels go down and they don't get power. So all of that would have to be sorted out if we were going to operate it basically as one reservoir instead of two. So I can't really answer the question. I don't know. I wouldn't take anything off the table. People also used to always say building a pipeline, that's crazy. That would never happen. Or desal, that's crazy. But some things, when there's demand and there's money to pay for it, sometimes people start talking about these crazy ideas to see if they're feasible and if they would help. So I don't know if that will be one of the solutions, but it probably will be part of the conversation. Sure.
So do you know anything about the lawsuit that's going on with the building subdivision out in the east side of town?
I don't know what
Isn't there a water
that
shortage
is.
over there and we have to be aware?
Oh, Rio Verde. Well, I mean, I can't talk about legal cases, but I do know about Rio Verde and that Rio Verde foothills area. I know that the city of Scottsdale used to provide water for water hauling in that area, or they still do actually. They are providing water, but that area is not part of Scottsdale's service area. So Scottsdale has all the cities have a drought management plan. And under Scottsdale's plan, I guess they have to stop serving those entities that are outside of the service area. And so that's on the horizon, and that's been really concerning to those people who are hauling water. And I do know that there's a lot, County Board of Supervisors is involved. There's a lot of community groups that are getting together trying to find a solution. I think there's some water providers that have said we'd be private utilities that have said we'd be happy to provide water to this area, but we don't have a assured water supply for that area yet. And they're trying to, they can't use groundwater under the groundwater code. So they have to figure out an alternative supply that they can import into that area. And so it's complicated, but I think a lot of people are aware of it and trying to find another water supply for that area. Any other questions in the room? And then I'll move to the online people. Sure, go ahead. But maybe wait for the microphone.
Do you know the condition of the snowpack this year?
Well, it's been really interesting this year because last year was incredibly dry. So one of the things that influences, how much of the snowpack gets to the river is the soil conditions. And if it's really dry soils, then it just soaks up all that snow and it doesn't make it to the river. So we did get some precipitation in, the summer and fall, a couple of good storms that have improved the soil conditions. The snowpack, it was in December, we had some really good storms in the upper basin in December and January, but then it's tapered off. So I don't remember the exact percent. I think we're at like maybe 75% of average on snowpack. So that is better than we were last year. It's lower than average, but and I don't think that's the exact right number, and it changes every month. You could find it on our website, but I think we're in that range. So yeah, we're hoping for good hydrology. That really helps. And the snowpack influences all of this more than the rain does. The snow is where we get the runoff for the rivers.
Okay, two
Yes.
questions. One, communities like Arrowhead Lakes, Scottsdale Lakes, communities like that where the houses are on these little canal systems. I'm assuming they're not going to allow to build anymore in Arizona. I think that moratorium's been out for a while. So that'd be a question. And then the other question would be the semiconductor plant that's coming in and other plants like that. How much water are they going to suck out of our system?
Sure, both really good questions. So the communities that have lakes, there was something we call the Lakes Bill that prohibited it has limitations on the size of lakes and what type of water you can use for lakes. If you had a lake that predated that, then you kind of got grandfathered in. If it's after that, then you're limited. So under the current law, you can still use lakes, but you're very limited to the size and the type of water you can use. And you have to report everything to the Department of Water Resources. I don't know if that will change going forward, that they'll say no lakes at all. But right now that's what you have to comply with. I think a lot of the cities, from what I've heard, as developers are working with the cities, they're saying, if you want to build a golf course, you have to find a non-groundwater supply, or you have to find effluent to do it. Not all the cities are saying that, but some. And I think probably the same kind of thing with the lakes, that they might look less favorably on any community that's planned with a lot of lakes in it. Even, if it complies with the lakes bill, they might still not want to approve it if it has too many lakes. So the cities have a lot of control over that with the new developments. And then your second question, the semiconductor plant. Well, that's huge for this valley, for Arizona. I mean, that's a big deal that plant is coming in. It's going to create a bunch of jobs, new development around that area. So really good in terms of, growth in our economy. These chip plants, so we have these semiconductor plants. We also have data storage centers that are like Facebook coming in and building these big data centers. From both of those use a lot of water. So there's it's been in the news, there's a lot of discussion. Should we be building these types of things here? What I know is that most of them the cities are requiring that they recycle all of their water. So even though they use a lot of water, they have to be very, very efficient with it. Everything gets recycled and they use it multiple times for the purpose. So that, even though the quantity is a lot, that, is a little bit more sustainable, I guess, if you think of it that way. And also, the land is less expensive here than in some other parts of the country. So the bottom line of these businesses is like, there's a lot that Arizona has to offer. So if they can figure out the water thing, they want to be here. So that decision is really made by the cities, whether they're going to approve that kind of thing. And as far as I know, there's no, prohibition on a utility that uses a lot of water, but it's really something you can, the city councils will be involved with, and the community will engage on that, whether they want to have that. I think the places where it's been approved, those cities have, they have good portfolios, water portfolios. They have enough water, and they're working on these water use agreements to limit how the water gets used. Any other questions here? Yeah, I think Kim? How should we do the Zoom questions? Okay.
The question is, what, if any, ocean desalination may/does affect the water level of the seas and the ecology? And then does it affect the plant and sea life?
Yes, so that's a great question about the desalination is what are the environmental impacts of ocean desal? So, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm not, I'm not a scientist who has studied all of this. And there's probably people who could, who know the details of that a little bit better than I do. But I am very interested in it. So I've done my research. What gets produced when you're desalinating ocean water, there's a lot of salt in it. So there's lots of there's groundwater that has high salt content that you have to desalinate. It goes through reverse osmosis. The cost of it is related to how much salt is in the water. So with groundwater that's salty, it's less expensive to treat it because it has a lower salt content. The ocean has a pretty high salt content, so it's more expensive to run that through an RO system. Then there's a waste that comes out called brine, which is basically all the salt with the water removed. And so what do you do with that? There's 3 different ways you can dispose of it. One is injecting it deep under the ground. There's some places that do that. We can't do that in Arizona because of the geology and our aquifers and the impact that it could have on groundwater. But I think there's some places in Texas where they're doing that. There's, I forget what they're called, but they're basically like big salt basins where you put the salt and you just, if there's water with it, it evaporates over time and you get these kind of big salt mounds and you have to figure out, where to locate something like that and what you can do with it, what kind of impacts it might have on like birds. But that doesn't go into the ocean. Then if you're doing if you release the brine into the ocean, originally when this started to be done, they'd have like a pipeline that would put the brine back into the ocean, but it was so much salt that it was impacting, the flora and fauna, the fish and everything in that area. And sometimes the water was too salty and they, would die, and it was having a bad impact on them. So they've designed these pipelines that go really, really far out into the ocean, so into the deeper waters, and then they have these little holes along the pipeline so that the brine is released slowly, just like a little bit each as it goes. So it's not all being released into one location. So it's basically diffused into a larger area. And so the impacts are less on the, on the marine life. That is my understanding of what would be done in the projects that we're looking at in the Sea of Cortez. But I'm sure there's going to be more conversation because the Sea of Cortez is a really unique ecosystem, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more discussion about whether, those impacts, whether that technology resolves the environmental issues or not. And I know you can dig around on my website, on C.A.P's website, and there's been some studies done on these projects, and they've looked at the environmental impacts. But that's about all I know about it, and encourage you to, look into that further if you have questions. Anything else?
One other thing, there's just a lot of questions coming about, Rio Verde. So any resources you can direct people to on that?
I'm not sure. I know that Maricopa County, if you go to their website, they do have some information about Rio Verde, because Rio Verde it's part of the county. It's part of the Phoenix Active Management Area, but not necessarily, part of Scottsdale. So anyway, I think they have some resources on the Maricopa County website. They have some studies about, the geology, the hydrology in that area, and then also looking at land use planning for the area. So that might be helpful. Department of Water Resources has all the kind of the information about the laws and rules and things that apply in active management areas. So I would encourage Department of Water Resources website or the county, Maricopa County. Any other questions? I think maybe that covers it. Thank you. And if you want to look at my website, since I'm running, it's Alexandra, the number 4az.com. And I have a few cards here if you want to go, check out my campaign. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. So I know sometimes, water resources can be a dry topic. Ah, there you go. Okay, I got some moans. That was good. Thank you all. All right, well, we're about at our time. Thank you again for coming out and sharing with us today. Definitely some good information there, and in particular, those resources. Is any of this proprietary, or would you be okay if we shared the slides? Okay, and Kim was on top of it. She double checked. So yes, we have a rule for that. So we'll send that on out. If anyone joining us online is not already in our group mailing list, maybe just drop your email address in comments. We'll make sure we get that out to you guys as well. But hey, thanks for coming out today. Great to see y'all, and make it a great month.